Hello, hello. I hope everyone's having a good day today. It's been a really long time since I hopped on and did a Facebook Live, so I figured I would hop on today. For those of you who are new to me and my page, I am Bianca Jordan. I'm an immigration attorney at Brazen Legal, which is my law firm that I've been running for about 7 years now. I help immigrants get legal status in the United States. Specifically, I help immigrants get green cards, citizenship. I help immigrants who have filed for asylum. I represent immigrants in immigration court. I help immigrants apply for waivers. And I also help immigrants respond to letters that they might get from immigration, such as a request for evidence or a notice of intent to deny, things like that. Green cards are my jam. And actually, I just got back from a green card interview. It was a marriage based green card interview. And I thought that I would just hop on live. I want to try to come on live a little bit more often. And I figured I would just hop on today, have a little bit of time. And I wanted to use this opportunity to share some tips on how you can better prepare for your immigration interview. So, as I mentioned, marriage based green cards are my jam. The majority of green card cases that I handle are for people who are married to a US citizen and they're trying to get a green card. And that was the case that I had today for the interview. And immigration, as we all know, has gotten so much harder over the past, I guess, 5 years now. We no longer have the Trump administration. However, we are still dealing with residuals from the Trump administration, even though we have President Biden now, and he does plan on changing immigration and hopefully implementing some changes to the immigration law itself. We still have to deal with the Trump administration. So things aren't going to change dramatically overnight, unfortunately. And so we are still dealing with officers that are really tough at interviews and really scrutinizing every aspect of your immigration application. Immigration officers are going so far back as your very first application to even come to the US, whether that was a visitor's visa that you filed from overseas to come here, or maybe you filed an asylum application decades ago that maybe you forgot about. They're going really, really deep in the archives for your cases to find any little thing that they can use against you to deny your application for a green card these days. So what I like to do for my clients as like an added bonus, I make sure that I prepare them extra for their immigration interviews, because the forms themselves are not the problem. They are, they can be tricky. The questions are very repetitive, and there are some questions where if you don't fully understand it and you answer something incorrectly, that could be a problem. Or there are questions where they're asking about things that you're thinking they're only asking about like right now in the immediacy. But again, going back to the fact that immigration officers can look back as far back as they want to in your immigration history, and there are things that maybe you said on a prior application that might contradict something that you're saying on your current green card application, or vice versa. So the forms is one aspect, but over the past 4 years, I've noticed that the interviews are getting tougher and tougher as well. So what I like to do for every single one of my clients, whether it's a green card client or maybe it's a client that is applying for US citizenship, but specifically for my green card clients, especially if they're getting a green card through marriage, I provide each of my clients with my immigration guidebook, and I update it after every single immigration interview that I go on, because I'm constantly getting new questions that immigration officers are asking. So my guidebook is literally hundreds of questions that immigration officers have asked my clients during their interviews, and I compile them all and I give them to each of my clients so that they can, not so that they can memorize and, sound robotic and things like that for their interview, but just so that they can have an idea of what kinds of questions immigration is going to be asking them at their interview, so that they can be prepared to know what kinds of questions they might be asked, and then also to provide an answer for that as well. Every client's answer obviously is not going to be the same, but I still like to provide this booklet because it gets you thinking about things. A couple years ago, I went on an interview with my client, and the immigration officer asked my client, "What did your wife have for lunch yesterday, and how did she pay for it?" And I'm sitting there kind of questioning, also thinking about what my husband, if I were asked that question about my husband, I wouldn't have been able to answer that. I wouldn't have known what my husband had for lunch the day before and how did he pay for it. So that was like a tricky question. But these are the types of questions that they're asking. They're not just asking you, how did you meet? How long have you been together? Like, did you have a wedding? Yeah, they want to know those things and they may very well ask you those things, but they're getting really deep into getting an idea of what your relationship is like, what your marriage is like, what your everyday life is like. They're asking questions like, how do you pay your bills? Do you pay by check? Do you pay electronically? Do you go in person and pay cash? They're asking you questions like, where do you keep the spare toilet paper in your house? How many remote controls do you have in your house? They want to know who's living with you. They want to know what color is the wall in your bathroom. Like, they're asking in-depth questions. What kind of toothpaste does your spouse use? So I just want people to really get an idea of what kinds of questions you're asking at the interview so that you can have a better idea for preparing. And at today's interview with my clients, which again, this was a marriage-based green card petition, the questions that they were asked, almost every single question that they were asked was actually in my booklet. There were a few that weren't, and I'll go back and update that for future clients. But for the most part, they were super prepared for the interview. Um, I expect to get the green card in the mail in the next week or so for my client. But he and his wife were very prepared for the interview. They used my booklet. I did practice sessions with them. I do practice sessions with all of my clients. Again, I don't want my clients to go into the interview and sound robotic and sound like they memorized a story. I want them to be able to tell the story of their relationship and the evolution of their relationship in their own story, in their own words, but just in a comfortable way. Because it really doesn't matter how often, how many practice sessions you do. And I think with this client, I think we did 2 or 3 practice sessions. You could do 100 different practice sessions and still be really, really nervous because that's just the way that it is. It's just a nerve-wracking situation. So for those who maybe have never had an immigration interview before, never applied for a green card before, and aren't aware of what the interview process is or even the application process, I'll break it down very quickly. So if you are in the United States and you are applying for a green card because you're married to a US citizen and you came to the US legally, which means you entered the US with like a visitor's visa, or maybe the government paroled you into the US. Basically, you came through the border legally and you were allowed to enter. Then you're able to apply to adjust your status, which means that you're getting your green card in the US. As long as you don't have any issues like, criminal issues or things like that that make you inadmissible. But assuming all things are good, you came here legally with a visitor's visa, and then you're married to a US citizen, you can get your green card here. So you file all the paperwork together at USCIS depending on where you're living. And then you're going to get your receipt notices, which just means that USCIS has accepted your application. And then you're going to get your biometrics notice, which, just as a disclaimer, receipt notices and biometrics appointments are taking forever right now. Receipt notices have been taking forever for a while, and then biometrics appointments are also taking a while as well. Pre-COVID, pre-issues, you could get your receipt notices in like a couple weeks, and then biometrics a couple weeks later. But now we're looking at receipt notices taking a minimum of 8 weeks and biometrics taking even longer. I have cases that I filed in September that I just got biometrics notices for this week. So if you're filing on your own, or if you have an attorney and you're kind of wondering what's going on with my receipt notices, just know that this is like a national problem. Doesn't mean that your attorney's horrible. It just, a lot is going on with USCIS right now, and the receipt notices and biometrics notices are taking forever. But once you file, you get your receipt notices, which again is just USCIS saying that they've accepted your application. Not approved, they've accepted it, meaning that all the signatures were good, everything that they need at a minimum to make a decision on your case has been provided to them. If you are waiting for your receipt notices, though, if you paid USCIS with a check, check to see if your bank allows you to get an image of that check. On the back of that check, usually they'll write your receipt numbers down on that. So that's another way that you can check to see if USCIS has at least accepted your case, even though you don't have the receipts yet. So you do your biometrics, which is just your fingerprints and taking your picture. And then over the course of the case, it's just being processed. And how fast depends on where you live, what their case processing times are. Sometimes your case might be transferred to another facility, and if that happens, you'll get a transfer notice in the mail. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your case. It just means that maybe where your case was originally sent is really backed up. And so to prevent a further backup, they might transfer your case to another location that maybe doesn't have that crazy slow processing times or something like that. And then sometimes, depending on what you submitted to immigration with your packet originally, you might sometimes get a request for evidence, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just USCIS asking you for more documentation. Sometimes they're asking you for things that you did provide to them, but again, you just kind of send it again. Sometimes they overlook things. Sometimes if cases aren't organized when they're submitted, they can't find things. And so it's not necessarily the end of the world if you get a request for evidence. And then you also get your medical records done between when you file and your interview. I no longer, and this is just a preference for me, other lawyers might do it differently, I no longer send in medical records with my clients' applications unless they have it done within like a couple weeks before the application packet is ready to file. And the reason why is because a couple years ago, I think back in November 2018, USCIS changed the policy around medical forms where you have to get it done within 60 days before filing. And sometimes my clients can't do that, or sometimes, even though the application is ready to go, maybe my client is still missing something, so we can't file the application yet. So just to save my client the aggravation of possibly having to pay again to have the medical records done, I just have my client send them after the fact. And I just let my clients know that USCIS will be sending them a, they send you a notice of deficiency. It's usually on like some colored paper, either pink or yellow. They'll send you a letter that just says they did not receive your medical record. So it's nothing like, it's not going to cause your case to get denied or refused or anything like that. They're just going to further down the line tell you, hey, we didn't get your medical records. Please bring it with you at the interview. And that's what I usually do. I have my clients bring it to me or bring it with them at their interview. So that's generally the process. And then you get scheduled for your interview. Pre-COVID, pre-Trump actually, you would get your work permit pretty early on in the process. But over the years, the Trump administration wanted to put up as many roadblocks for immigrants as possible, one of them being access to work permits so that they can actually get jobs here. So the work permits have been coming a little later in the process. In my experience with my clients, the work permit usually comes a couple weeks before their interview is scheduled. And then they get the work permit, and then shortly thereafter, they get the interview. So I send my clients my interview questionnaire, my interview booklet early on in the process so that that way they have a couple months to at least go through the packet and kind of practice with the questions. And again, I don't do this so that my clients sound like robots at the interview. I do it so that they can start to think about some things that maybe they take for granted every day that they might be asked about at the interview. Again, one of the questions that I've been getting often at my interviews is, where do you keep the spare toilet paper? I mean, obviously you live with your spouse, you know where you guys keep the spare toilet paper, but that's not exactly something that you would be thinking about. Or, like who's the morning person in your relationship? Who goes to bed earlier? Like questions like that, most people don't tend to really know. And even me, I tell my clients all the time, like my husband and I have been together a really long time, and there are still some things about him that I don't know. So never mind, other people who are applying for a green card, and then to be in such a nerve-wracking, high-pressure environment because the officers are pretty much drilling you. The officer today was asking my clients the same questions over and over at different points, trying to trip them up. Because again, the officers are always trying to do this. Not to say the officers are really mean or anything. The officer I had today was really great. I have yet to have any really bad experiences with any immigration officers, but their job is to, make a decision. USCIS's only job is whether to approve or deny your case. So, in addition to making sure that your application packet is filled out correctly, all T's crossed, all I's dotted, all the information that they need is there and it's properly organized, then, it makes the process a little bit easier. Um, I like to make the process easier for my officers to say yes to the application because when you're applying for an immigration benefit, whether it's a green card or asylum, whatever it is, that application is going to be your first impression on that officer. And you want to make sure that that first impression is a great one because you really only get one opportunity to make a great first impression. So if you're submitting an application that is all over the place, has smudges, pages are folded and wrinkled and creased and not really organized, then that's the impression that you're giving to the immigration officer. So for me, for all of my cases, everything is organized. Everything is two-hole punch. I include exhibits. I include cover letters. Everything's tabbed out and organized so that when the officer gets your application packet, they're happy because everything is where it needs to be. They can easily find it. Everything's already two-hole punch, so they don't have to do it themselves. They're good to go, ready to go. They have everything that they need. So that, and then also, so throughout the process, I'm working with my clients on making sure that they are prepared for the interview. I usually do a couple practice interviews with my clients. I've rarely had a situation where I've had to do more than three practice interviews with my clients. It really just depends on them. I'm open to, give my clients as many as they need to within reason. I think 20 borders on a little obsessive, but I like to make sure that I'm preparing them for answering questions. The best kind of questions to answer are closed-ended questions, so like a yes/no question. And I have clients who can sometimes be a little bit wordy and they want to tell the immigration officer their whole story. They want to, kind of go down a rabbit hole and give the officer so much detail and all of these facts. And I train my clients to not do that because the last thing you want to do is to volunteer information that the officer didn't ask you about and that actually ends up hurting your case. I've seen it happen before with a client. He kind of went down this whole rabbit hole with the officer, and the officer took that as an opportunity to kind of bring my client around and around and through another rabbit hole. Fortunately, my client was able to get back on track, but sometimes if you volunteer information, it can trigger something in the officer that makes them think about something else or question something else you said previously. So I train my clients to just answer what is asked and that is it. Like, when was your birthday? September 3rd, 1980, whatever. And that's it. Like, the officer's not asking you where you were born, what hospital, what time, date of birth, state it, move on, and just be quiet. Like, don't volunteer information for your interviews. So as far as tips that I wanted to provide to you guys, this first one is going to sound very like, duh, like, why wouldn't you do this? But you would be surprised how many people don't do this. So the first tip that I would give you in preparing for your interview is to review your application. Once you get that interview notice in the mail, go through your application packet again 1 or 2 times just to make sure that you remember what you're filing. Because for some people, especially for people that applied for green cards pre-COVID, some of those green card applications were filed over a year ago. You don't necessarily remember everything you put down on a piece of paper a year ago. especially if you didn't do it yourself, if your attorney filled it out for you. Usually attorneys will also give the packet back to their client so they can review it before they submit it. At least I do that. I know some lawyers that don't, but I like my clients to know what's going on at every step of the process. I do not file anything until my client has reviewed it and is comfortable with it and understands what we're sending, because at the end of the day, this is my client's life, it's not mine. So even if you have reviewed it, even if your lawyer gave it to you to review, it's likely been, like at least 6 months since you last saw it. So the first thing you should do is re-review that application packet. Um, if you are working with someone who did not give you a copy, ask them for one. This is your application. You have a right to have a copy of that application. I give my clients a copy of their submission right after I file it, or actually right before I file it. I give my clients a copy of what we're actually filing with the immigration agency. And then if they get a request for evidence later down the road, I'm also giving them a copy of that as well. So I want my clients to always have a copy of their stuff, always know what's going on, always know what stage in the process we're at, and what needs to be done next. So first thing you need to do is review your application. Make sure that you remember what you put in there. When you get to the immigration interview, one of the first things that the officer is going to ask you is, is your address correct? Is all the information on your forms valid? And then they'll get into the questions about, your everyday life with your spouse. Um, the second thing that you should be doing is practicing questions. So whether, if you're not working with an attorney, it might be worth it to hire an attorney just to help you with immigration interview prep. Some attorneys don't offer that piecemeal. I do. I offer that in just my services, but I also offer it for people who maybe wanted to do the application process on their own, but now they just want that extra security of preparing for their immigration interview. So for me, I either will prepare the client for, if the person did not hire me to do their original green card application, I'll still help them prepare for the interview. But it's usually I help you prepare for the interview and I actually go to the interview with you. And as an immigration attorney, I'm licensed to practice immigration law throughout the US, and I have clients like pretty much everywhere as long as they're immigration clients. So don't let geography be a barrier to you finding an attorney that you like that can help you prepare for the interview and possibly attend at the interview. Even if the attorney is out of state, with COVID, USCIS is allowing attorneys to represent clients through the phone. So that is also an option. And actually, today, when I went to the immigration interview with my clients, I went in person, but there were a couple people whose attorneys were representing them over the phone, especially if their attorneys were out of state. So that hasn't been a problem, at least not in the Boston office, which is the office I primarily deal with. So those are the two things. Definitely practice your questions. If you're able to, if you're able to work with someone that has practice questions. If you don't have access to practice questions, at least review the application process. At least review the application that you submitted so that you remember the information. Don't lie about anything. That's the third tip, especially for people who are married to a U.S. citizen, but maybe you worked undocumented in the U.S. It's fine if you did, as long as you're married to a U.S. citizen, because our immigration laws pretty much, I don't want to say like they let you get away with it. They kind of do, but like for lack of a better way of saying it, if you are here undocumented, like let's say you came into the US with a visitor's visa and then you overstayed and then you ended up getting a job working under the table and you're married to a US citizen who's now getting you a green card. That's fine. So when you go to the interview and they ask you, have you ever worked undocumented or have you ever violated the terms of your non-immigrant visa? Your answer should be yes, because for one, they already have information about you and they very likely already know that you've been working or something. So the last thing you want to do is lie about something that is not going to really affect you in the greater scheme of things because you're married to a US citizen. Now, if you're married to a green card holder and it's the green card holder that's getting you a green card and you've worked here undocumented, then you've got a problem and you should be working with an attorney. But If you came here legally, overstayed your visa, got a job anyway, married to a US citizen, and they ask you, have you ever violated the terms of your non-immigrant visa? Then your answer is yes, because when you come in with not a student visa, but when you come in with a visitor's visa, you cannot work. So if you get a job after coming in with a visitor's visa, then yeah, you are violating the terms. Or if you came in with a visitor's visa and then you overstay, that's also violating the terms. So don't lie about anything on your application. If you happened to lie about something when you filed, then you can fix it at the interview, because again, they're going to ask you these questions. So if you, let's say you lied about something, or maybe you checked the wrong box, so it wasn't intentional, you can fix that at the interview. And you should fix that at the interview, because if you allow them to make a decision, maybe, whether they're going to approve it on the spot or it needs to go to supervisor review or something, you don't want that officer to confront you about a lie that you had an opportunity to fix. And now, worst case scenario, they deny your application for fraud and misrepresentation. And now you need a waiver, which is going to be more costly for your case. So, those are my 3 tips. Review your application before your interview. Try to get some practice questions done. If need be, work with an attorney, hire an attorney to go with you to the interview. Um, there is a common misconception, and I don't know where it came from, but there is a common misconception that if you bring an immigration lawyer to your interview, the immigration officer is going to think that something's up, something's wrong with your case. And that's not necessarily true at all. And if anything, having an immigration attorney there with you, especially your immigration attorney who has been with you every step of the way, having that attorney there with you in a way makes you feel more comfortable. It makes you feel like you're really ready for battle, because these interviews sometimes really are like, they feel like you're in war. I remember somewhat recently, well, when I say recently, I mean like pre-COVID, I had an interview with someone. It was a green card interview, marriage-based green card interview. The immigrant was getting a green card through a US citizen. And that interview was like 3.5 hours long. So it can feel like battle. But if you have someone there on your side, then it doesn't feel like it's you versus the officer. It's kind of like you and your lawyer versus the officer. And if the officer dares to ask any question that's inappropriate, your lawyer can step in and say, you can't ask that. So having an attorney there with you can make you a little bit more comfortable. It can make the process go a little bit more smoothly. So even if you did your application on your own, try to see if you can find an attorney to at least help you prep for the interview and also possibly go there with you. And then thirdly, don't lie at the interview. Don't tell the officer you've never worked here undocumented if you have, and if you're married to a US citizen. If you did lie about anything on your green card application, make sure that you fix it at the interview, because that's the last time or place that you'll actually have some sort of like reprieve or something where the officer can, like will be a little bit nicer about it. So that's mainly what I wanted to talk to you about. Like I said, I just came back from this interview. Everything went well. And while it was on my mind, I wanted to hop on and do this live. I do hope to come back on and do more lives more often. I usually do lives on like Instagram and TikTok sometimes, but I feel like I've been neglecting my Facebook fam. So I'm going to try to come on live. If you have any questions about any of the tips that I provided in this video, feel free to drop them in the comments. Share them with anybody that you think would benefit. Again, I'm attorney Bianca Jordan. I'm an immigration lawyer at Brazen Legal. I help immigrants all over the world get legal status in the U.S. Green cards are my jam. I can do them in my sleep. And if you need to if you want to talk to me, you can either go to my website, brazenlegal.com, or you can call my office at 508-942-7497. If you're not in the United States, you can also contact us on WhatsApp at the same number. Talk to you guys soon.